If it wasn't for my faith, I wouldn't be here. My other son, who was there, was holding his hands on the hole, trying to save his life. And he told me, "Dad," I looked at him. In his eyes, he was gone. He wasn't breathing. If there is a precedent or some precursor that maybe this could have been prevented, I don't know. I am concerned with the lack of security. How does someone bring a knife to a track meet?
Walking that bitch get critical. Dance moves hitting so hard, shit crucial. Walking that bitch get critical. Dance moves hitting so hard.
Yeah, this is our tailgate, so we're going to right so I can see the fucking.
It was supposed to be just another high school track meet. Students from across Frisco, Texas, gathered at Kuykendall Stadium on a rainy April morning in 2025, their school spirit undimmed by the weather delay. Athletes huddled under team tents, waiting for the storm to pass so competition could begin. But beneath one of those tents, a confrontation was brewing between two teenagers who had never met before. Within minutes, one would be dead, and the other will be facing a murder charge that has divided a community and sparked national controversy. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old, an honors student with a near-perfect GPA, the MVP linebacker of his football team, and a young man with his whole future ahead of him. He attended the track meet that morning as a member of the Memorial High School team, standing beside his identical twin brother, doing what he'd done countless times before. He had no way of knowing that a dispute over a seat under a tent would end with him bleeding out in his brother's arms. This case is still ongoing. Karmelo Anthony, also 17 at the time, has been charged with first-degree murder and has pleaded not guilty, claiming self-defense. The trial is scheduled for June 2026. In August 2025, a gag order was issued, silencing all parties involved until the trial concludes. I'm examining a developing case that has shocked Frisco, a prosperous suburb north of Dallas. A case involving a single stab wound, conflicting accounts of what happened in those crucial moments, and two families forever changed. This is the story of Austin Metcalf. Austin Matthew Metcalf entered the world on July 31, 2007, in Frisco, Texas, arriving just minutes after his identical twin brother, Hunter. From that moment forward, the two boys were inseparable, sharing everything from their mother Megan's womb to the football field where they would later make their mark. Their father, Jeff Metcalf, a realtor who described himself as a single dad who loved his sons more than anything, watched with pride as the twins grew into remarkable young men. Those who knew Austin remember a young man whose smile could genuinely light up a room. His infectious laughter became his signature, a sound that friends and family would desperately miss after April 2nd, 2025. Teachers at Memorial High School in Frisco knew Austin as an exceptional student who maintained a 3.97 GPA while juggling the demanding schedule of a two-sport athlete. He wasn't just going through the motions of high school. Austin was excelling, driven by dreams that extended far beyond the Friday night lights of Texas high school football. Football wasn't merely a sport for Austin Metcalf. It was his passion, his pride, and his pathway to the future. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing 220 pounds, Austin played middle linebacker and fullback for the Memorial High School Warriors. His coaches and teammates voted him team MVP during his junior year, recognizing not just his athletic ability, but his leadership qualities. Austin led by example, both in the weight room and on the field. He recorded an impressive 203 tackles in just 19 games, statistics that had caught the attention of Division I college recruiters. His father, Jeff, remembered how Austin's love for football was instantaneous from the moment he first stepped onto a field. The sport consumed him in the best possible way, fueling his work ethic and determination. But Austin was never the kind of athlete who neglected his studies for his sport. He understood that his mind was just as important as his body, maintaining that no perfect GPA even during football season. Friends recalled how Austin would tutor them in algebra, patiently explaining concepts until everyone understood. He was a student who showed up to every game, not just the ones where he played, cheering loudly, perhaps too loudly, his friends joked, for his teammates and classmates. When you saw Austin Metcalf in the stands, you heard him. His support was never quiet or half-hearted. Austin's girlfriend spoke at his memorial service about how he had shown her what true love looked like. She read a poem inspired by their relationship, describing how Austin was a glue holding her whole life together. Friends shared memories of his spontaneous humor and easygoing personality. One moment he'd be intensely focused on film study or workout routines. The next he'd have everyone laughing with an unexpected joke or observation. He was kind-hearted and genuine, the type of person you immediately knew you could count on, someone who would show up when you needed him. Outside of school, Austin found peace in the outdoors. Hunting and fishing trips with his father and Hunter were treasured traditions, moments when the three Metcalf men could escape into nature together. The weekend before Austin's death, they went hunting, not knowing it would be their last time together. Jeff Metcalf would later express how grateful he was for that final weekend, how blessed he felt to have those last memories of watching both his sons doing what they loved. Austin was an active member of Hope Fellowship Frisco East, participating in the youth group where his faith grew stronger throughout his teenage years. His final post on social media read, "Faith that God got me red hot hash and my work will pay off." Those words took on profound meaning after his death, shared millions of times by people who never knew him but were moved by the tragedy of a life cut short. Taisha Solomon, the student pastor at Hope Fellowship, would later describe Austin as a true warrior who embodied that spirit to his very core. His twin brother Hunter perhaps knew Austin better than anyone else in the world. They shared that indescribable connection that twins often describe, an understanding that went beyond words. They played football together, Hunter as an outside linebacker while Austin anchored the inside. They worked together at Halo Pizzeria alongside their mother Megan. They shared dreams of playing college football, maybe even beyond. At Austin's memorial service, Hunter fought back tears as he read a poem capturing their bond. "We break, you fix, we hurt, you heal. Now silence fills the space you kept. The echo of your love is left, but we still hear your laugh." Hunter described Austin as the strongest and bravest kid he knew, wishing they could make more memories together. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old, with plans to take his football career to the next level. He had the grades, the athletic ability, and the character that college coaches seek. He had a family who adored him, friends who relied on him, a girlfriend who loved him, and a twin brother who was his best friend and constant companion. He was, by every measure, a young man with unlimited potential. Frisco, Texas, sits about 20 minutes north of Dallas, part of the rapidly growing suburban sprawl that has transformed the region over the past few decades. Once a small town, Frisco has become one of the fastest-growing cities in America, attracting families seeking good schools, safe neighborhoods, and opportunities for their children. The Frisco Independent School District serves more than 60,000 students across multiple high schools, each with its own identity and fierce school pride. Memorial High School, where Austin attended, opened in 2015 as part of the district's expansion. The Warriors pride themselves on academic excellence and athletic achievement, creating an environment where students like Austin could thrive in multiple arenas. The school's newer facilities and competitive programs attracted families who wanted the best for their children. Football culture runs deep in Texas, and Memorial's program was no exception. Friday night games drew crowds of parents, students, and community members, united in their support of young athletes like Austin and Hunter Metcalf. Austin's daily routine reflected the discipline required of a student-athlete with his ambitions. His day started early with morning workouts before classes. During the academic day, he maintained focus in his courses, knowing that his GPA mattered as much as his 40-yard dash time for college recruitment. After school came practice, grueling sessions where Austin and his teammates pushed themselves under Texas heat, building the strength and condition that would carry them through football season. Evenings often meant homework, film study, or shifts at Halo Pizzeria, where Austin worked alongside his mother and brother. The owner, Corey Orders, knew Austin as part of a Halo community, a beloved member of their work family. The Metcalf family's dynamics were unique. Austin's parents, Jeff and Megan, were no longer together, but both remained deeply involved in their sons' lives. Jeff lived in one location, Megan in another, but their focus on supporting Austin and Hunter never wavered. Megan recalled the day she learned she was expecting twins, how she stayed in bed scared to death that her life was about to change. "It did change," she said at Austin's memorial, "but in such a blessing." Watching her boys grow into young men filled her with pride even as she worked multiple jobs to support them. Track and field season in spring 2025 represented another chapter in Austin's athletic journey. While football remained his first love, Austin understood that track training would increase his speed and explosiveness on the football field. He approached track with the same dedication he brought to everything else, showing up, working hard, supporting his teammates. The UIL District 11-5A Championship track meet scheduled for April 2nd at Kuykendall Stadium was just another meet, another opportunity to compete and improve. Austin had no enemies. He wasn't the type of kid who started fights or looked for trouble. Friends and family emphasized his kindness, his reliability, his gentle spirit despite his physical presence on the football field. He was protective of those he cared about but not aggressive or hostile. When Austin and Hunter arrived at Kuykendall Stadium that Wednesday morning, Austin expected a normal track meet. He expected to wait out the weather delay, compete in his events, and go home to prepare for the rest of his week. He had no way of knowing that another student-athlete from a rival high school would be sitting under his team's tent. He couldn't have imagined that asking that student to move would lead to violence. Austin Metcalf went to a track meet that morning expecting to run. Instead, he would never run again. Kuykendall Stadium stands as one of Frisco ISD's premier athletic facilities, a modern complex designed to host the district's numerous sporting events. Located in the heart of Frisco's athletic district, the stadium features a regulation track surrounding a pristine football field, bleacher seating, and team areas where schools set up their temporary headquarters during meets. On any given competition day during spring, multiple schools converge on the facility, their students, coaches, and families creating a vibrant atmosphere of friendly rivalry and shared athletic culture. The stadium is named after David Kuykendall, reflecting Frisco's tradition of honoring individuals who contributed to the community's growth and education system. The facility represents significant investment in student athletics, part of the district's commitment to providing students with opportunities to excel in sports alongside academics. Track meets at Kuykendall typically draw large crowds, particularly during championship events when district titles are on the line. The UIL, or University Interscholastic League, governs high school athletics across Texas, organizing competitions and championships that carry real weight in the intensely competitive world of Texas high school sports. District championship meets matter not just for bragging rights, but for qualification to regional and state competitions. Students train all season for these moments, and schools take pride in their athletic achievements as much as their academic ones. On April 2nd, 2025, Kuykendall Stadium hosted the District 11-5A Track and Field Championship, bringing together students from multiple Frisco ISD high schools. Memorial High School, Austin School, was competing against rivals including Centennial High School, Lebanon Trail, Lone Star, and others. These schools share the district but maintain distinct identities and competitive spirits. Games and meets between district schools carry extra intensity. These aren't strangers meeting for the first time, but familiar rivals who face each other repeatedly throughout the year across multiple sports. Each school typically sets up team areas at track meets, designated spaces where their athletes can gather between events, store their bags and equipment, and wait for their competitions. These areas often include pop-up tents providing shade and shelter, particularly important in Texas where weather can shift quickly from brutal sun to sudden storms. Teams mark their territory, creating temporary home bases identifiable by school colors, team banners, and the gathered athletes in matching uniforms. Frisco's rapid growth has brought prosperity but also challenges. The city has invested heavily in schools and facilities, attracting families from diverse backgrounds seeking opportunities. The school district's multiple high schools create natural rivalries, but the community generally prides itself on safety and positive competition. Serious violence at school events was virtually unheard of in Frisco. Parents sent their children to track meets, football games, and school activities with confidence in their safety. The morning of April 2nd started with typical pre-meet energy. Students arrived early, coaches checked in their teams, athletes began warming up. Then the weather intervened, as it so often does in Texas during spring. Storm clouds rolled in, bringing thunder, lightning, and heavy downpours. Meet officials made the only responsible decision: delay competition until the weather passed. This wasn't unusual for Texas track meets, and everyone settled in to wait, athletes seeking shelter under team tents and in the covered areas of the stadium. During these delays, students mill about, talking with teammates, checking their phones, trying to stay loose while waiting for competition to resume. The atmosphere is typically relaxed, friendly even between rival schools. Athletes might chat with competitors from other schools, sharing the common experience of being track athletes waiting out a storm. Coaches monitor weather updates, officials communicate with schools, and everyone waits with varying degrees of patience. Under the Memorial High School team tent that morning, Austin Metcalf and his twin brother Hunter waited with their teammates. They had no reason to expect anything unusual. They were simply doing what they'd done at countless meets before, waiting for their turn to compete, supporting their team, staying dry during the storm. It was supposed to be just another day of competition in a sport that Austin used to improve his football skills. But that morning, someone who didn't belong under the memorial tent would refuse to leave when asked. And that refusal would lead to a tragedy that would shake not just Frisco but capture national attention and spark fierce debates about self-defense, violence, and justice. Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025, dawned as a significant day for student-athletes across Frisco Independent School District. The UIL District 11-5A Championship track meet represented the culmination of weeks of training, the competition where athletes would determine district standings and qualify for advancement to regional meets. For Austin Metcalf, it was another opportunity to compete, to push himself, to support his Memorial High School teammates. He woke that morning in Plano, went through his pre-competition routine, and traveled to Kuykendall Stadium alongside Hunter and their teammates. According to investigators who would later reconstruct the timeline, Austin arrived at the stadium in the morning hours, going through the normal check-in procedures with his coaches. It's an unwritten rule of track meet etiquette that you stay in your own school's area unless you have a specific reason to be elsewhere. At approximately 9:55 a.m., according to surveillance footage timestamp and witness accounts that police would later gather, someone who didn't belong under the memorial tent was sitting there. Karmelo Anthony, a 17-year-old student from Centennial High School, was waiting out the storm under the memorial team's tent. According to police reports and witness statements, Anthony wore a Centennial tracksuit, clearly identifying him as belonging to a different school. The exact reason Anthony was under the memorial tent rather than with his own Centennial team remains unclear from public records. Perhaps he had been talking with friends from other schools, a common occurrence at meets. Perhaps the memorial tent offered better shelter or was closer to where he'd been when the storm hit. Whatever the reason, his presence there would become the spark that ignited a fatal confrontation. Hunter Metcalf, Austin's twin brother, noticed Anthony sitting under their team tent. According to witness statements in the arrest affidavit, Hunter approached Anthony and told him he would need to move out from under their team's tent. This was a reasonable request. Anthony was clearly from Centennial, evident from his uniform, and he was sitting in the space designated for memorial. In the world of high school sports, especially in Texas where school pride runs deep, these boundaries matter. What happened next would be disputed, interpreted, and debated for months to come. According to multiple witness accounts provided to Frisco police and documented in the arrest warrant affidavit, when told he needed to move, Anthony opened his bag and reached inside. Then, witnesses reported, Anthony spoke words that would prove chillingly prophetic. "Touch me and see what happens." The tension escalated from there. Austin Metcalf, standing near his brother, reportedly then touched Anthony. Witnesses state that Anthony's response was another warning: "Punch me and see what happens." These statements, documented by multiple witnesses, suggest that Anthony was issuing challenges, essentially daring the Metcalf brothers to physically engage with him while simultaneously warning them of consequences. The weather continued as assault on the stadium, rain drumming on the tent fabric above them. Around them, other athletes were going about their business, unaware that beneath one tent, a confrontation was building toward violence. The timestamp on surveillance footage would later show that these exchanges happened quickly, minutes at most, as the situation escalated from a simple request to move to threats of violence. According to the arrest warrant affidavit based on witness statements, after the verbal exchange and Anthony's repeated warnings, Austin Metcalf made a decision. Witnesses told police that Austin grabbed Anthony, attempting to physically move him from the memorial tent. Different witness accounts provided slightly different descriptions. Some said Austin pushed Anthony, others described it as grabbing him to move him, but the consistent thread was that Austin made physical contact with Anthony in an attempt to enforce the request that Anthony leave the memorial team area. What prosecutors allege happened next occurred with shocking speed. According to witnesses who provided statements to police, Anthony reached into his backpack, He pulled out what witnesses described as a black knife. Without further warning, according to the arrest affidavit, Anthony stabbed Austin Metcalf once in the chest. Then Anthony ran. That single stab wound, prosecutors would later confirm, penetrated Austin Metcalf's heart. It was a devastating injury, the kind of wound that no amount of first aid could overcome. In that split second, Austin's future, his dreams of college football, his plans to take his life to the next level, his relationship with his girlfriend, his bond with his twin brother, all of it ended. The knife, investigators would later recover, was thrown by Anthony into the bleachers behind the tent, covered by a blue tarp that police erected during their evidence collection. Crime scene technicians photographed and collected the weapon, a crucial piece of physical evidence that would become central to the prosecution's case. The fact that Anthony allegedly brought a knife to a high school track meet would raise questions that defense and prosecution would answer very differently. Austin's reaction was immediate and instinctive. Clutching his chest, he ran down from the bleachers where the altercation occurred. Witnesses reported hearing him call out for help. He was conscious in those initial moments, aware that something catastrophic had happened to him. But the injury was too severe, the damage too extensive. Hunter Metcalf, who had witnessed at least part of the confrontation, rushed to his brother's side. In what would become one of the most heartbreaking details of the case, Austin collapsed into Hunter's arms. Jeff Metcalf would later describe to Fox News what Hunter told him. "I put my hand on there. I grabbed his hand and looked in his eyes. I just saw his soul leave, and it took mine too." Hunter held his identical twin, his best friend, his constant companion, as Austin's life slipped away. No training, no preparation could have equipped a 17-year-old boy for that moment, watching his brother die, unable to save him, experiencing trauma that would mark him forever. The reality of what had just occurred spread through the stadium with horrifying speed. Athletes who had been sheltering from the storm, waiting to compete, suddenly found themselves witnessing a medical emergency. Someone called 911. The exact timestamp of that call would become part of the investigation's official record, marking the moment when a track meet became a crime scene. Athletic trainers from the various schools present at the meet rushed to Austin's aid. These professionals, trained in sports medicine and emergency response, immediately recognized the severity of the situation. They began CPR, following their training, doing everything possible to keep Austin alive until emergency medical services could arrive. They performed chest compressions, working desperately as precious minutes ticked by. The surveillance camera position near the press box, which had been recording the field as it always did during meets, captured distant footage of the sudden movement under the memorial tent, followed by people running both toward and away from the area. Frisco ISD officials would later confirm this footage exists, though due to the camera's distance and angle, individuals are not easily identifiable in the images. The district released limited access to media to view the footage but did not allow recording or public release of the video, citing the ongoing investigation and respect for the families involved. Frisco Police Department officers received the emergency call and responded to Kuykendall Stadium. As they arrived on scene around 10 a.m., they found athletic trainers performing chest compressions on Austin Metcalf, who by this point was not conscious and not breathing. The officers could see this was a critical situation requiring immediate advanced medical intervention. An ambulance entered through the stadium gate near the end zone, according to surveillance footage timestamp analysis. Paramedics quickly assessed Austin's condition and realized they faced a challenge. Austin was in the bleacher area, and getting him onto the stretcher while maintaining life-saving measures required coordination. The footage shows him initially trying to bring the stretcher to where Austin lay, then returning it to the end zone and carrying it up into the stands. Paramedics administered what care they could, including attempting a blood transfusion according to family accounts. They worked with urgent intensity, knowing they were fighting against time and catastrophic injury. Austin was loaded into the ambulance and rushed to a nearby hospital, likely Medical City Plano or another Level 1 trauma center capable of handling such severe injuries. Meanwhile, back at the stadium, police officers were beginning their investigation even as a medical emergency unfolded. They needed to secure the scene, identify witnesses, and locate the suspect. Meet officials made announcements, instructing students to remain in designated areas as police worked. The joyful atmosphere of athletic competition had been replaced by shock, confusion, and growing horror as word spread about what had happened. Law enforcement officers quickly established a perimeter around the Memorial High School tent area. They cordoned off the section with crime scene tape, preserving evidence and preventing contamination of what had become an active investigation site. The blue tarp that appears in the surveillance footage marked the location in the bleachers where officers found and secured the black knife that witnesses had described Anthony using. Investigators began the painstaking process of identifying and interviewing witnesses. At a high school track meet, dozens if not hundreds of people are present, but not everyone was close enough to the memorial tent to have witnessed the actual stabbing. Officers needed to separate those who had seen something from those who had only heard about it after the fact, distinguishing first-hand accounts from rumor and speculation. The physical evidence collected from the scene would become crucial to the prosecution's case. Crime scene technicians photographed the area from multiple angles, documenting the layout of the memorial tent, the bleachers, and the surrounding stadium. They collected the knife, presumably testing it for fingerprints and biological evidence. They likely examined Austin's belongings in the general area for any other relevant physical evidence. Meanwhile, at the hospital, medical professionals fought to save Austin Metcalf's life. The single stab wound had penetrated his heart, causing massive internal bleeding and catastrophic damage to his cardiovascular system. Despite the best efforts of the athletic trainers who had performed CPR immediately after the stabbing, the paramedics who had rushed him to the hospital, and the trauma surgeons who received him in the emergency department, the injury proved unsurvivable. At approximately 10:50 a.m., less than an hour after he was stabbed, Austin Metcalf was pronounced dead. The official cause of death will be documented in medical examiners' reports: homicide by stabbing, with a fatal wound penetrating the heart. Austin had bled out, his circulatory system unable to function after the knife severed critical cardiac structures. No amount of medical intervention could have reversed that damage once it occurred. In the arms of his twin brother, and later despite the efforts of trained professionals, Austin's life ended at 17 years old. Back at Kuykendall Stadium, the track meet was obviously cancelled. Frisco ISD officials made the difficult decision to evacuate students, arranging for school buses to transport athletes safely away from what was now a crime scene. Coaches tried to comfort traumatized students who had witnessed violence that would mark them forever. Parents rushed to the stadium, desperate to reach their children and confirm their safety. Hunter Metcalf faced an unimaginable trauma. He had witnessed his brother's stabbing, held Austin as he died, and now had to process the reality that his twin, his best friend, the person he'd shared life with since before birth, was gone. His other teammates from Memorial High School were similarly traumatized, having witnessed one of their own being killed during what should have been a normal athletic competition. For investigators, the physical evidence from the scene would tell part of the story, but witness testimony would be crucial. Multiple students had watched the confrontation unfold, had heard the verbal exchange, had seen Austin push or grab Anthony, had witnessed Anthony pull the knife and stab Austin. These witnesses would need to be interviewed carefully, their statements documented, their accounts compared to ensure consistency and accuracy. In cases where eyewitness testimony becomes central to prosecution, investigators know that memory can be affected by trauma and time, making it essential to gather statements as quickly as possible. The Frisco Police Department faced another urgent task: locating Karmelo Anthony. According to all witness accounts, Anthony had fled the scene immediately after stabbing Austin. Officers needed to find him quickly, both to secure his arrest and to prevent any possibility of flight or further violence. As they worked the scene and interviewed witnesses, other officers were searching for a 17-year-old Centennial High School student who had allegedly just committed murder at a track meet. While medical professionals fought to save Austin Metcalf's life and crime scene technicians processed the area under the memorial tent, Frisco police officers were actively searching for Karmelo Anthony. In a typical stadium during a track meet, there are numerous places someone might go, multiple exits they might use to flee. Officers needed to move quickly to prevent Anthony from leaving the area entirely, potentially going home or to another location where apprehending him might become complicated. According to police reports and court documents that would later become public, the search for Anthony didn't last long. Witnesses have provided a detailed description of the suspect, a 17-year-old male wearing a Centennial High School tracksuit. In the chaos of the emergency response, with students from multiple schools present and some being evacuated, locating one specific teenager might seem challenging. But Anthony didn't flee far or hide effectively. What happened next would become one of the most significant elements in understanding this case. Rather than continuing to flee or attempting to evade capture, Karmelo Anthony surrendered himself to police. Different sources describe this slightly differently. Some reports indicate he was quickly located and apprehended. Others suggest he essentially turned himself in. But the outcome was clear. Within a short time after stabbing Austin Metcalf, Anthony was in police custody. A school resource officer, trained law enforcement officers assigned to school campuses and events, was among those who made contact with Anthony. According to the arrest warrant affidavit, when officers took Anthony into custody, he was visibly emotional. The report describes him as crying hysterically, showing clear distress about what had just occurred. This emotional state would become relevant to both prosecution and defense perspectives on the case. What Karmelo Anthony said to police in the immediate aftermath of his arrest would become some of the most damaging evidence against him and simultaneously the foundation of his self-defense claim. According to the arrest warrant affidavit prepared by the Frisco Police Department, Anthony made several statements to officers that were carefully documented. First, according to the responding officer's report, Anthony said, "I was protecting myself." This claim of self-defense would become the central argument of his legal defense in the months to come. But it was Anthony's subsequent statements that demonstrated the complexity of this case and the challenges facing his defense team. As officers processed his arrest and communicated with one another about having the suspect in custody, one officer referred to Anthony as the alleged suspect. According to the arrest affidavit, Anthony's response was immediate and unequivocal. "I'm not alleged, I did it." This admission shocked officers. Suspects typically don't confess so directly and immediately, especially to a murder charge. Anthony wasn't denying his actions or refusing to speak to police. He was openly admitting that he had stabbed Austin Metcalf. As officers escorted Anthony toward a police vehicle, he made additional statements. "He put his hands on me. I told him not to," Anthony reportedly said, referring to Austin Metcalf. This statement aligned with witness accounts that Austin had touched or grabbed Anthony during the confrontation. Anthony was providing his perspective on what had justified his use of the knife. He claimed he had warned Austin not to touch him. Austin had touched him anyway, and therefore Anthony's response with deadly force was defensive. Once Anthony was placed in the back seat of the police vehicle, he asked officers a question that revealed his emotional state and perhaps his understanding of the severity of what he'd done. "Is he going to be okay?" Anthony wanted to know whether Austin Metcalf would survive the stab wound. At that point, Austin was either still being treated by paramedics or had just arrived at the hospital. Officers likely didn't yet know Austin's status, but given the severity of the wound and Austin's condition when paramedics worked on him, they probably suspected the outcome would be fatal. Anthony also asked officers whether what he had done could be considered self-defense. This question would become central to the entire legal proceeding that followed. Anthony wasn't claiming innocence in the sense of denying his actions. He admitted stabbing Austin, but he was asserting that his actions were legally justified as self-defense. In Texas, as in most states, a claim of self-defense can absolve someone of criminal liability for using force, even deadly force, if certain conditions are met. The question for the legal system would be whether those conditions existed in this case. Officers also noted, according to the arrest affidavit, that they observed fresh blood on Anthony's left middle finger while he was in the police vehicle. This physical evidence corroborated the witness accounts and Anthony's own admission that he had stabbed someone. The blood likely came from the knife handle or from contact with Austin during or immediately after the stabbing. While Anthony was being processed into custody, the investigative team continued their meticulous work at Kuykendall Stadium. Homicide investigations, particularly those involving juvenile suspects and potential self-defense claims, require extraordinary attention to detail. Every piece of physical evidence, every witness statement, every photograph could become crucial in court. The knife recovered from the bleachers where Anthony had allegedly thrown it after the stabbing was the most critical physical evidence. Crime scene technicians carefully documented its location, photographed it in place before collection, and then secured it following proper chain of custody procedures. The knife would be tested for fingerprints, likely revealing Anthony's prints on the handle. Biological evidence, blood matching Austin Metcalf's DNA, would presumably be found on the blade. The size and type of knife would be documented, helping establish whether this was a small pocket knife or a larger, more dangerous weapon. The question of why Anthony had a knife at a track meet would become significant. Track meets don't require knives for any legitimate purpose. Athletes need running shoes, perhaps spikes for certain events, water bottles, team uniforms, but not weapons. The prosecution would argue that bringing a knife to a school event demonstrated premeditation, or at least a willingness to engage in violence. The defense would need to explain the knife's presence, perhaps arguing it was something Anthony routinely carried for nonviolent purposes, though that explanation would face skepticism. Investigators collected physical evidence from the memorial tent area and surrounding bleachers. They may have found drops of Austin's blood marking his paw from where he was stabbed to where he collapsed. They likely collected items belonging to both Austin and Anthony, documenting everything that might be relevant to reconstructing the events. The surveillance footage from the stadium's press box camera became another crucial piece of evidence. While the distance made individual identification difficult, the footage provided a timeline and showed the general sequence of events: people gathering under the memorial tent during the weather delay, the sudden movement indicating the altercation, people scattering, first responders arriving. This objective record, uninfluenced by the perspective or bias of any witness, would help establish the basic timeline of events. Most importantly, investigators conducted extensive witness interviews. Track meets involved not just athletes but coaches, parents, officials, and spectators. Multiple Memorial High School students were under or near their team's tent when the confrontation occurred. Some witnessed the entire sequence from beginning to end. Others saw only part of it. Some heard the verbal exchange. Others only saw the stabbing itself. Each witness needed to be identified, separated from others to prevent conversation that might contaminate their independent recollections, and interviewed carefully about what they saw and heard. The arrest warrant affidavit would later reference multiple witnesses whose account corroborated the basic sequence of events. Anthony was under the memorial tent. Hunter Metcalf asked him to leave. Anthony made threatening statements while reaching into his bag. Austin physically touched or grabbed Anthony, and Anthony pulled a knife and stabbed Austin once in the chest before fleeing. These consistent witness accounts form the foundation of the prosecution's case, demonstrating that multiple independent observers saw the same basic events unfold. The Collin County Medical Examiner's Office received Austin Metcalf's body and conducted an autopsy to determine the official cause and manner of death. Medical examiners in homicide cases document everything meticulously: every injury, the path of any wounds, the condition of internal organs, toxicology results, and any other medical findings relevant to understanding how and why the person died. In Austin's case, the autopsy would have revealed the devastating damage caused by a single knife wound. The blade had penetrated his chest wall, passed through tissue and bone, and entered his heart. Depending on which chamber of the heart was penetrated and what major blood vessels were severed, Austin would have begun bleeding internally at a catastrophic rate. The heart, when damaged, cannot pump effectively, leading to rapid circulatory collapse. Even with immediate expert medical care, wounds that penetrate the heart often prove fatal. The medical examiner's report documented the wound's location, angle, and depth. These details would help investigators understand the mechanics of the stabbing, where Anthony and Austin were positioned relative to each other, how much force was used, whether this was a stabbing motion or more of a slash. The autopsy report will become a key piece of evidence for the prosecution, demonstrating that this was a fatal wound delivered with deadly force. The toxicology report would show whether Austin had any substances in his system at the time of his death. Given that this occurred mid-morning at a school track meet, investigators likely expected the toxicology to be clean, but testing is standard procedure in all homicide cases. The results would confirm that Austin was sober and clear-headed during the confrontation, contradicting any potential defense argument that he was impaired or unpredictable. The official manner of death was ruled homicide, death at the hands of another person. This is a medical determination, not a legal one. Homicide as a manner of death doesn't automatically mean murder. It simply means one person killed another. The legal question of whether that killing constituted murder, manslaughter, or justifiable homicide would be for the courts to decide. With physical evidence collected, witness statements documented, Anthony's own admissions recorded, and the medical examiner's findings complete, the Frisco Police Department had built what they believed was a strong case. They consulted with the Collin County District Attorney's Office about what charges were appropriate given the evidence and circumstances. On April 3, 2025, the day after Austin Metcalf's death, Karmelo Anthony was formally charged with murder. In Texas, Murder is defined in the Penal Code as intentionally or knowingly causing the death of an individual, or intending to cause serious bodily injury and committing an act clearly dangerous to human life that causes death. The prosecution's theory would be that Anthony either intended to kill Austin when he stabbed him in the chest, or at minimum intended to cause serious bodily injury using an act, stabbing someone with a knife, that was clearly dangerous to human life. Initially, Anthony was held at the Collin County Juvenile Detention Center, reflecting his status as a 17-year-old. However, due to the serious nature of the charge and other factors, prosecutors took steps to have Anthony certified to stand trial as an adult. In Texas, 17-year-olds can be prosecuted as adults for serious felonies like murder. The decision to charge Anthony in adult court rather than the juvenile system reflected the prosecution's view of the case's severity and their belief that adult criminal penalties were appropriate. The murder charge carried enormous potential consequences. In Texas, murder is a first-degree felony punishable by 5 to 99 years or life in prison. Even though Anthony was a juvenile at the time of the offense, being certified as an adult meant he potentially faced adult sentencing if convicted. His entire future, his education, his freedom, his life trajectory now depended on what would happen in the courtroom. Anthony appeared for his arraignment, where he was formally read the charges against him and asked to enter a plea. Through his attorney, Anthony entered a plea of not guilty. This plea signaled that his defense team would be arguing self-defense, claiming that while Anthony did stab Austin Metcalf, his actions were legally justified as a response to Austin's physical aggression toward him. One of the most contentious early legal battles in the case involved whether Karmelo Anthony should be released on bail while awaiting trial or held in custody. In murder cases, particularly those involving deadly weapons and juvenile defendants being tried as adults, bail decisions become a complicated balancing act between public safety, flight risk, and the defendant's constitutional rights. The prosecution argued strenuously against Anthony's release. They pointed to the severity of the charge, the strength of their evidence, and the potential danger Anthony might pose if released back into the community. They emphasized that this wasn't a heat of passion killing in private. This was a stabbing at a public school event with numerous witnesses. The prosecution wanted Anthony to remain in custody throughout the pretrial period. Anthony's defense attorneys argued for his release, presumably proposing bail conditions that would address the court's concerns while allowing their client to assist in his defense from outside custody. Being held in detention makes it harder for defendants to meet with attorneys, review evidence, and participate fully in their defense preparation. Defense attorneys typically argue that their clients, particularly juveniles with no prior violent history, don't pose a flight risk or danger if appropriate conditions are imposed. The court ultimately set bond for Anthony at $1.5 million. This extraordinarily high bail amount reflected the court's view that this was a serious case warranting significant conditions on any potential release. The defense appealed this decision to the 199th District Court, seeking a reduction in the bail amount to something more manageable for Anthony's family. However, District Judge Angela Tucker denied the appeal, maintaining the $1.5 million bond amount. For most families, posting $1.5 million bail is financially impossible. Even using a bail bondsman, which typically requires 10% of the bail amount plus collateral, would mean coming up with $150,000 cash plus asset to secure the remainder. The result was predictable. Karmelo Anthony remained in custody at the Collin County Jail, where he would stay throughout the pretrial proceedings awaiting his trial scheduled for June 2026. News of Austin Metcalf's death spread through Frisco with devastating speed. By the afternoon of April 2nd, students at Memorial High School were learning that their classmate, their teammate, their friend had been killed at a track meet. The shock was profound. Violent death doesn't happen at high school track meets in Frisco, Texas. This was a kind of tragedy that happened in other places, in other communities, not in their safe suburban world. Memorial High School activated crisis counselors and mental health professionals to help students process the trauma. The district released a statement acknowledging the incident and emphasizing their commitment to students' safety and well-being. Classes continued, but the normal rhythm of school life was shattered. Teachers struggled to focus their students. Athletes wondered whether they could ever feel safe at competitions again. Hunter Metcalf faced the impossible task of returning to school without his twin brother, walking hallways where Austin should have been beside him. Social media erupted with tributes to Austin. His final Instagram post, Faith that God got me red hot hash and my work will pay off was shared millions of times, becoming a tragic epitaph for a life cut short just as Austin's hard work was beginning to pay off with college recruitment interest. Friends posted photos and memories. The hashtag #HasJusticeForAustin began trending as people demanded accountability for his death. But as details of the case emerged, particularly Karmelo Anthony's identity and his claim of self-defense, the community's reaction became more complex and divided. This wasn't a clear-cut case of an unprovoked attack. According to all accounts, Austin had physically grabbed or pushed Anthony before Anthony used a knife. While many people felt that Austin's action of trying to move someone from his team's tent didn't justify a lethal response, others began questioning what had happened before that moment and whether the situation was more complicated than it initially appeared. The fact that Anthony was black and Austin was white added another layer of complexity to public discourse about the case. On social media platforms and in comment sections, debates erupted about race, self-defense laws, and whether the justice system would treat Anthony fairly. Some voices argue that Anthony, as a black teenager, might have felt genuinely threatened when grabbed by Austin and responded in what he perceived as self-defense. Others countered that bringing a knife to a school event and using it after issuing threats didn't fit any reasonable definition of self-defense. Centennial High School, where Anthony had been a student, faced its own crisis. While most of the public sympathy focused on Austin as a victim, Anthony's family and some community members raised concerns about rushing to judgment before all facts were known. They pointed out that Anthony had surrendered to police, had claimed self-defense, and deserved the presumption of innocence. The divide in the community grew as people took sides based on their interpretation of limited public information. On April 8, 2025, 6 days after Austin's death, Hope Fellowship Frisco East hosted a celebration of life service that drew an overflow crowd. The church building couldn't contain everyone who came to honor Austin's memory, forcing organizers to set up overflow seating and video screens outside. More than 1,000 people attended: classmates, teammates, teachers, coaches, community members, and people who had never met Austin but were moved by his story. The service celebrated Austin's life through the words of those who knew him best. His mother, Megan, spoke about the blessing of raising Austin and Hunter, about watching them grow from the twin boys she once feared she couldn't handle into remarkable young men. His father, Jeff, shared memories of Austin's passion for football, his infectious laughter, his determination. His girlfriend read poetry inspired by their relationship, describing how Austin had been the glue holding her life together. Hunter Metcalf faced the devastating task of eulogizing his twin brother. Standing before the crowd, fighting back tears, Hunter read a poem capturing their bond. We break, you fix, we hurt, you heal. Now silence fills the space you kept. The echo of your love is left, but we still hear your laugh. Hunter described Austin as the strongest and bravest kid he knew, expressing his wish that they could make more memories together. The image of Hunter holding his dying brother in his arms haunted everyone present, a reminder of how traumatic Austin's death had been for those who witnessed it. Coaches and teammates shared stories of Austin's leadership, his work ethic, his MVP season. Teachers spoke of his academic excellence despite the demanding schedule of a two-sport athlete. Friends recalled his humor, his reliability, his kindness. Youth pastor Taisha Solomon described Austin as a true warrior who embodied that spirit to his core. The consistent theme through all the tributes was that Austin Metcalf had been someone special, someone who made everyone around him better, someone whose future held unlimited potential. The service also became a moment of community solidarity against violence. Speakers emphasized that Austin's death was senseless, preventable, and unacceptable. Several speakers called for justice without naming Karmelo Anthony directly, respecting the ongoing legal proceedings while making clear their belief that Austin's killer needed to be held accountable. The gathering represented collective grief, but also collective anger that a high school track meet could end in death. A GoFundMe campaign established to help the Metcalf family with funeral expenses and to support Hunter as he processed his trauma raised significant funds from the community. Hundreds of donors contributed, leaving messages of support and sharing their own grief over Austin's death. Kari Orders, owner of Halo Pizzeria where Austin had worked alongside his mother and brother, described Austin as a beloved member of their Halo community, expressing the pain of losing someone so young and full of promise. As the community mourned and tried to process Austin's death, the legal machinery ground forward. Karmelo Anthony, held in Collin County Jail on $1.5 million bond, met regularly with his defense attorneys to prepare for what would be a lengthy and complex legal battle. His attorneys faced a challenging task of defending a client who had admitted to stabbing the victim but claimed legal justification for his actions. The defense's strategy centered entirely on Texas's self-defense laws. In Texas, a person is justified in using force against another when and to the degree the person reasonably believes a force is immediately necessary to protect themselves against another person's use or attempted use of unlawful force. The defense would argue that when Austin grabbed Anthony, he was using unlawful force, and Anthony reasonably believed he needed to defend himself. However, Texas law also specifies that the use of deadly force is justified only if a reasonable person in the actor's situation would not have retreated and the actor reasonably believed that deadly force was immediately necessary to protect against the other person's use or attempted use of unlawful deadly force. The prosecution would argue that Austin grabbing or pushing Anthony to move him from a tent didn't constitute deadly force, and therefore Anthony's use of a knife, deadly force, was a proportional or justified response. The case would hinge on several critical questions. Did Anthony reasonably believe he was in danger of death or serious bodily injury when Austin grabbed him? Could Anthony have simply moved from the tent or walked away rather than resorting to deadly force? Did Anthony's statements before the physical contact, "touch me and see what happens," and "punch me and see what happens," indicate that he was preparing to use violence rather than genuinely fearing for his safety? Why did Anthony have a knife at a track meet in the first place? Preliminary hearings address procedural matters, evidence admissibility, witness lists, potential motions. The prosecution submitted their evidence to the grand jury, which returned an indictment confirming that probable cause existed to believe Anthony had committed murder. Defense attorneys filed motions challenging various aspects of the prosecution's case, standard procedure in any serious criminal trial. The prosecution team, led by experienced Collin County prosecutors, emphasized the strength of their case. They had multiple eyewitnesses who saw the entire confrontation. They had Anthony's own admissions that he stabbed Austin. They had the murder weapon with Anthony's fingerprints and Austin's blood. They had video footage showing the timeline. They had the medical examiner's report confirming that Austin died from a single stab wound to the heart. The prosecution believed they had an overwhelming case of murder. The defense countered that physical evidence doesn't tell the whole story. Yes, Anthony stabbed Austin. He had never denied that, but the context mattered. Anthony was sitting peacefully under a tent when approached by Hunter Metcalf. He was told to leave. When he apparently didn't move fast enough or refused, Austin physically grabbed him. Anthony, according to the defense narrative that would emerge, felt threatened by this physical aggression and responded to defend himself. The defense would need to convince a jury that Anthony's response, while tragic in outcome, was legally justified given the circumstances. As media attention intensified and public commentary became increasingly heated, concerns grew about the case being tried in the court of public opinion rather than in the courtroom. Both sides worried that pretrial publicity could taint the jury pool, making it difficult to seat impartial jurors who hadn't already formed strong opinions about guilt or innocence. In August 2025, Judge Angela Tucker issued a gag order prohibiting all parties involved in the case, prosecutors, defense attorneys, witnesses, and family members, from making public statements about the case. This order, while standard in high-profile cases, had the effect of silencing the very voices that had been shaping public discourse about Austin's death and Anthony's prosecution. The Metcalf family, who had been vocal about their grief and their demand for justice, could no longer speak publicly about the case or the ongoing proceedings. The prosecution couldn't hold press conferences updating the public on developments. Anthony's defense team couldn't counter negative public narratives or explain their client's perspective. Witnesses couldn't share what they saw or heard. The gag order created a frustrating silence for a community desperate for information and updates. The legal reasoning behind gag orders is sound. Defendants deserve fair trial before impartial juries, and excessive pretrial publicity can prejudice potential jurors. But the practical effect is that public discourse becomes frozen, often based on incomplete information from the early stages of the case. In the Austin Metcalf case, the gag order meant that the public narrative largely remained where it was in April 2025, when initial reports and emotions were freshest, without the benefit of evidence and arguments that would emerge during the legal proceedings. The gag order remains in effect as of October 2025, with a trial scheduled for June 2026. This means that for nearly a year before the trial, no new official information about the case will be released. The silence is difficult for Austin's family and friends, who want to keep his memory alive and ensure the public doesn't forget him. It's difficult for Anthony's supporters, who want to ensure he's not convicted in public opinion before he has his day in court. And it's difficult for a community trying to process a tragedy and understand how something so violent could happen at a high school track meet. As of October 29, 2025, Karmelo Anthony has entered a plea of not guilty, maintaining his claim of self-defense. The intervening months have been a difficult waiting period for everyone involved. For the Metcalf family, every day without Austin is another day of grief. Hunter continues his final year of high school without his twin brother, navigating senior year experiences, football season, college applications, graduation planning, that he should have been sharing with Austin. The empty chair at the dinner table, the vacant bed in the bedroom they shared, the silence where Austin's laughter used to be, these daily reminders of loss make each day a struggle. For Karmelo Anthony, the months in custody have been their own form of limbo. As a teenager being tried as an adult, he faces decades in prison if convicted. He has missed his senior year of high school, missed track season, missed the normal experiences of being 17 and 18 years old. Whether it's a murderer who deserves punishment or a scared teenager who defended himself inappropriately, a question that will be decided by a jury, his life has been irrevocably changed by the events of April 2nd, 2025. The Frisco community continues to grapple with Austin's death. Memorial High School held moments of silence at football games throughout the 2025 season, honoring their fallen teammate. The Warriors wore helmet stickers commemorating Austin's jersey number. But as months passed and media attention faded, the intense focus on the case has given way to normal life resuming for most people. Only those directly connected to Austin or Karmelo Anthony continue to think about the case daily. The legal system moves slowly, particularly in murder cases where the stakes are so high. Both sides are preparing for trial, reviewing evidence, preparing witnesses, developing their strategies. The prosecution is building their case that Anthony committed murder, that his use of deadly force wasn't justified, and that he should be convicted and sentenced accordingly. The defense is preparing to argue self-defense, to explain why Anthony felt threatened enough to use a knife, and to convince a jury that their client, while responsible for Austin's death, isn't legally guilty of murder. The death of Austin Metcalf sent shockwaves through Frisco that continue to reverberate months later.